I'm so proud of my wife and my father for how they've handled all of last year. My children have managed brilliantly as well.
Catherine is in remission now.
Yes.
One early morning last summer, Catherine made an announcement that shook the British public. You see, Prince Louis and Princess Charlotte have long been admired for their bright smiles and cheerful public appearances. Yet, few could have imagined the emotions hidden behind those innocent expressions. But it all changed when Catherine made her heartfelt announcement about her children. The morning outside Kensington Palace felt really weird. It was this strange stillness that just didn't match the usual chaos of tourists, photographers, and staff. People had gathered there out of habit, expecting the usual routine. Maybe a car window rolling down, a quick wave, or catching someone slipping into a side entrance. But instead, there was this thick tension in the air, something you felt deep down before you could even figure out what it was. A few reporters were already there, but even they were not prepared for what happened next. Catherine stepped forward. She emerged without any of the usual royal fanfare. Seriously, none of the typical stuff. No uniformed escorts walking in formation, no fancy car pulling up exactly on the mark, no aides guiding her or flashing subtle signals, and the reason will surprise you. Keep watching. She had simply walked out of one of the palace doors and kept going until she stood right there, where everyone could see her. That decision, just that simple walk, carried a weight that immediately settled over the whole atmosphere around her. Her clothing was simple and familiar, nothing representing ceremony or official function. Her face showed signs of a night spent without rest. There was a quiet strain around her eyes, the kind that can only develop after holding back strong emotions for too long. Her posture was steady, but not rigid. Anyone looking closely could sense that she was balancing two forces within herself, one pulling her toward the role she had been trained to fulfill, and the other guiding her toward something deeply personal. Palace staff at the entrance watched her with hesitation. They did not move toward her or away from her. They seemed unsure whether they were witnessing the beginning of a planned appearance or something entirely unscripted. You see, royal protocol leaves little room for improvisation. Every statement, every photograph, every step is typically prepared ahead of time. The quiet confusion among staff made it clear that this moment belonged to her alone. The reporters who'd been hanging around sensed the break in pattern right away. They knew the drill. Over years of watching royal conduct, they recognized the familiar signals, and they saw exactly what was missing. No briefing notes handed out beforehand, no quiet, off-the-record guidance from the comms officers, zero stage management. The absence of all that stuff sent a message way louder than any official statement ever could. It signaled that this wasn't just another random appearance. This was something unprecedented. According to one journalist who had covered the royal family for more than 2 decades, the moment felt like a scene that rewrites public memory. Observers could tell that this was not an announcement about charity work or a ceremonial visit. This was someone choosing to stand in front of the world without institutional protection. That choice carried both risk and meaning. The monarchy is built on controlled presence. Stepping outside that control is recognized as an act of emotional urgency. Catherine walked toward the microphones that had been set up earlier for palace press briefings. The setting behind her was also unusual. The windows visible in the background were those of the royal nursery, the room where children play, learn, laugh, and grow. It is one of the most private and protected spaces within the palace. The fact that she was positioned with that part of the building behind her was not staged, yet it created a powerful image. The presence of that room in the background connected her words, before they were even spoken, to something rooted in family and childhood rather than royal duty. Her expression showed that this was not an easy step. For years, she had been trained to maintain composure in every situation. The expectation placed on royal women has often centered on grace and careful restraint. In official photographs, she had always reflected that standard. Yet now, composure was present in a different form. But that wasn't all. At this stage, it was no longer about perfection. It was about strength found in vulnerability. This was the first sign that she was about to speak, not from institutional duty, but from inner conviction. The lack of formal preparation changed the dynamic completely. The crowd did not cheer or call out. They understood instinctively that this was a moment requiring quiet attention. Reporters did not ask questions. They waited. Cameras adjusted their lenses with a soft mechanical click that seemed louder than usual. According to palace correspondents, Catherine had spent much of her public life avoiding unnecessary emotional drama. She preferred to build trust through consistent behavior. She rarely sought attention for herself. This made the significance of this moment unmistakable. When someone who avoids spectacle steps deliberately into the center of one, the meaning becomes undeniable. She took one breath that seemed to settle every thought inside her. At that moment, she stood not as a royal figure, but as a mother confronting a reality that could no longer be kept private. The children whose windows stood behind her were no longer abstract symbols of future duty. They were young individuals living with pressures that had begun to take a visible emotional toll. The world had not yet heard the details, but the shape of the story was now visible. As she prepared to speak, the world was unaware of how far this moment would reach, how personal truths shared in this courtyard would challenge the way the monarchy's internal life had been protected for generations. What would come next would draw attention not only to Catherine, but to the quiet walls of the nursery behind her. It would show how childhood within royalty carries weight that most children never know. And so her words were about to open a door. Behind that door stood her children, and the reality of what they had been carrying leading into the next part of this story. Keep watching, because things are about to get a lot more interesting. When Catherine finally began to speak that day, the world expected a polished message, something prepared and refined. But what they received was different. She spoke as someone who had been carrying the quiet weight of her children's experiences, and she revealed that the image presented to the world had not reflected the life they were living behind palace walls. People had always seen George, Charlotte, and Louis smiling during public celebrations and official photographs. The images showed coordinated outfits, polite posture, and cheerful expressions. Catherine explained that these moments were only the surface. There was more behind the smiles, something the public had not been allowed to see. The daily life of the royal children operated on a strict schedule that began early and ended late. Every lesson, every outing, every conversation with adults was monitored. Their behavior was shaped in subtle ways that left little room for spontaneity. From the moment they woke up, there were routines to follow and expectations to meet. The environment around them functioned like a system of measurement. How they moved, how they responded, how they smiled, how they carried themselves. Everything was observed. Catherine shared that this was not simply about politeness or education. It was about training them to embody a role. There was little space for being simply young children. George carried the heaviest weight among them. As the eldest, he was constantly reminded, directly or indirectly, that he was the future of the monarchy. Even at 10 years old, he could feel the pressure of a role defined long before he was born. Psychological research has long shown that children who are raised in environments where expectations are constantly emphasized can experience heightened anxiety, especially when those expectations feel fixed and unavoidable. Catherine revealed that George had begun asking questions that no child should have to ask. He worried about disappointing people. He worried about being watched. He worried about the idea that his future was already decided for him. His smile in photographs had sometimes become something he practiced, rather than something that came naturally. If you think that is sad, wait until you hear Charlotte's part. Charlotte faced a different kind of challenge. She was confident and expressive by nature. From a young age, she had shown a strong sense of self. She liked choosing her own clothing. She liked speaking her mind during family moments. Yet, within the palace environment, independence was carefully managed. There was an unspoken effort to shape her into a supportive figure rather than a bold one. She was encouraged to be graceful and cooperative at all times. Catherine had begun to notice small changes. When Charlotte played alone, she was vibrant and lively. When staff members or tutors were present, her body language shifted. She became careful. She watched her words. Catherine recognized that her daughter was learning to filter herself. That filter was not being built because of personal growth, but because of societal expectation. Louis, the youngest, experienced the pressure in another way. He became aware of cameras, earlier than most children become aware of their own reflection. From the age of 2, photographers would appear, sometimes dozens at a time, capturing every expression. At first, he did not understand the attention. As he grew older, he began to associate crowds and cameras with discomfort. Catherine noticed that he would grip her hand tightly when facing public settings. In private, he asked if there would be cameras when leaving the house. Studies in child development have shown that repeated exposure to overwhelming environments can shape how children respond to new situations, often creating caution where there would normally be curiosity. Catherine realized that Louis was beginning to see the outside world as something to brace against rather than explore freely. But that wasn't the wildest part. What stood out most in Catherine's reflections was the emotional restraint taught within the family's traditions. The children were encouraged to hold back visible signs of distress. They learned to stay composed during ceremonies, appearances, and events, even when tired or overwhelmed. Catherine explained that she began to recognize how this restraint was becoming instinctive. There were fewer bursts of laughter. There were fewer spontaneous questions. There were fewer moments where they allowed emotions to rise without concern for how it looked. Many royal biographers have documented how emotional control has been an expectation in the monarchy for generations. Catherine had grown increasingly aware that this expectation was shaping her children before they had even developed a strong understanding of themselves. The change in their behavior did not happen all at once. It happened slowly, through small adjustments in posture, tone, and expression. Catherine described how she noticed that George paused before reacting to good news, as though checking whether the reaction would be appropriate. Charlotte had begun asking whether she was standing correctly. Louis, who once ran freely across lawns, had become careful in open spaces when others were nearby. Their natural movements were being replaced with learned responses. Tutors and advisors played a significant role in their daily interactions. These individuals were not unkind, but their focus was on shaping the children into figures suitable for public life. Their role was to guide, correct, and maintain consistency. Catherine observed that while they fulfilled their duties with precision, they rarely supported emotional expression. They rarely encouraged creativity unless it aligned with expectations. She realized that these adults were acting as guardians of tradition rather than caretakers who nurtured individuality. Catherine came to see that the palace environment did not encourage the formation of personal identity. Instead, it encouraged the development of symbolic identity. The children were being prepared to represent something larger than themselves. In doing so, the unique parts of who they were becoming were being softened, reshaped, or set aside. Catherine understood that this had been the experience of many generations of royal children, including their father. Yet, she could not ignore the change when she saw joy dimming in her children's eyes. Childhood is brief. The years where imagination is strong and confidence is pure do not last forever. Catherine recognized that those years were slipping away faster than she had expected. She understood that the world admired the children, but the admiration came at a cost. Their childhood was being shaped in service to the royal image. The polished moments presented to the public were built through emotional effort behind the scenes. As Catherine spoke, she made it clear that she could no longer allow her children to live within a system that prioritized public perception over emotional well-being. She understood that the world valued the monarchy's continuity, yet she believed that continuity should not require sacrifice that would shape her children's futures in ways they could not choose for themselves. This revelation did not only show the pressures within the palace, it revealed a deeper conflict between the private needs of a family and the public expectations of an institution that has existed for centuries. Catherine's decision to speak openly marked the beginning of a shift that the world had not seen coming. It set the stage for the emotional war. The true impact of her revelation will surprise you. Stay tuned. When Catherine's words reached the public, the effect was immediate and deeply emotional. Across Britain and beyond, her voice echoed memories that had never fully faded. People began to remember another woman who had once stood in front of the same institution, trying to protect her sons from the same invisible weight. The comparison between Catherine and Princess Diana formed naturally in the minds of millions. It was not about resemblance or appearance. It was about courage and pain. Diana had once spoken of isolation within the palace. Catherine's words seemed to pick up that thread years later, showing that the struggle had never truly ended. Old footage of Diana began circulating again on television and social media platforms. Clips from interviews where she had spoken about wanting her children to grow up feeling loved rather than pressured were shared thousands of times. The public began to draw parallels between Diana's fight for emotional honesty and Catherine's plea for her children's well-being. Even younger audiences, too young to remember Diana's life or her death in 1997, found themselves moved by the pattern repeating before their eyes. Inside the palace, William was overwhelmed. He had always carried quiet memories of his mother, memories he rarely discussed. Catherine's speech reopened those feelings. He saw in her decision the same kind of bravery that had once defined Diana's final years. For William, it was not simply about public reaction. It was about history repeating itself in painful detail. He remembered what it felt like to be watched by the world while his family fractured. Now, he feared his own children might face the same fate if the cycle continued. Public sentiment turned rapidly in Catherine's favor. Within 24 hours, her name dominated global news. International newspapers placed her photograph on their front pages, describing her as the royal voice of empathy. We are about to reveal another shocking truth about her. According to polls conducted by YouGov in Britain, there is a sharp increase in her popularity, with approval ratings soaring above 80%, higher than any other member of the royal family. Hashtags carrying her name trended across countries as people expressed admiration for her honesty. Parenting groups, psychologists, and public figures began discussing the emotional cost of raising children in environments that demand constant performance. The tone of conversation had shifted from royal gossip to social reflection. Social media transformed her message into a worldwide discussion. Videos of her speech reached millions within hours. Platforms like TikTok and Instagram were filled with short clips of her standing alone outside the palace, accompanied by emotional captions and music. Journalists described it as the most significant royal statement since Diana's televised interviews. And King Charles' reaction to her statement is interesting. According to royal observers, King Charles is not pleased about the events. To him, Catherine's public statement represented more than emotional honesty. It was a breach of discipline. He interpreted it as a challenge to the order that had sustained the monarchy for centuries. In his view, private struggles should remain private, particularly within a family whose authority rested on composure and continuity. Behind closed doors, he expressed concern that Catherine's choice to speak openly would weaken the public's respect for the crown. His advisors agreed. They warned that empathy could quickly turn into criticism, and that once control of the narrative slipped away, it would be difficult to reclaim. Camilla, who had built her public image carefully over the years, saw Catherine's sudden global support as a personal threat. For 2 decades, she had worked to gain acceptance from a public that once viewed her with suspicion. She understood how fragile popularity could be. Watching Catherine rise so quickly in global sympathy reminded her of how easily royal reputation could shift. Within palace corridors, subtle tension grew between the two women. While they were never open rivals, their positions within the public imagination now stood in direct contrast. One represented tradition and duty, the other represented emotion and change. Advisors inside the palace began drafting strategies to regain control of the situation. Communication experts proposed statements that would emphasize unity within the family, suggesting that Catherine's words had been taken out of context. Others considered releasing photographs of the children appearing happy and relaxed to soften the story's intensity. There were discussions about highlighting the king's role as a supportive father and grandfather. Yet none of these efforts felt convincing. The public's attention had already shifted toward Catherine as the emotional center of the monarchy. Every attempt to redirect focus only made her seem more authentic. William found himself caught between 2 worlds. On one side was his loyalty to the institution that had shaped his entire life. On the other was his loyalty to his wife, who had spoken truthfully about the pressures within that same institution. The situation reached a point where silence was no longer an option. Within the privacy of Clarence House, William and the king faced each other in a conversation that carried the tension of generations. The atmosphere was not one of formality, but of raw emotion. The king wanted an assurance that William would help repair the public image of the family by aligning himself with palace strategy. William could not give that assurance. He understood that to disavow Catherine publicly would not only betray her, but would also betray his own memories of his mother. The argument between father and son revealed something deeper than disagreement. It revealed the divide between personal truth and royal survival. Charles had grown up in a time when duty outweighed personal feeling. William had grown up witnessing what that kind of restraint could destroy. Their views were shaped by different experiences, and those differences collided that day. The confrontation did not end in shouting. It ended in silence, the kind that carries finality. For William, the decision became clear. He would protect his wife and children from the same emotional patterns that had shaped his childhood. He understood that the cost of royal life had always been emotional distance. He did not want that distance passed down another generation. Privately, he began to withdraw from certain palace routines, choosing instead to spend more time at their residence in Windsor, away from constant supervision. Friends close to the couple later observed that this period marked a turning point. William's focus shifted from maintaining public appearance to securing private safety. The situation inside the palace became increasingly fragile. Behind the outward calm of official engagements, tension was thick. Senior courtiers tried to manage the optics, but whispers of internal division began leaking into the media. Stories appeared suggesting disagreements about how to handle Catherine's growing influence. Palace sources attempted to deny them, yet the pattern of subtle contradictions made the tension more believable to the public. The monarchy, which had always relied on the illusion of unity, now faced visible cracks. Thank you for staying with us. Do you think Catherine's revelation was the right decision? Share your opinions with us in the comments section. If you enjoyed the video, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Also, click the following video on your screen, and you will enjoy it.